On today's show, we're talking about Adolis Garcia's oblique injury and why deciding if Emiliano Teodo should be a starter or reliever is such a difficult thing to do. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the Texas Rangers, the first and best daily Rangers podcast. I'm Bryce Paddock, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Paddock. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, on today's show, we're talking about Adolis Garcia's injury, what we know, what we don't know, what the plan is there, and Emiliano Teodo, one of the Rangers' top pitching prospects, chucking that gas. Should he go in the pen? Should he stay as a starter? Why it is such a difficult choice to make. But let's start with Adolis Garcia. News broke yesterday as I was recording the pod that Adolis Garcia was scratched from yesterday's game with oblique tightness. They were going to get an MRI and see what the deal was there. And just a little bit before I started recording, Bruce Bochy spoke to the media, and we know what's happening with Adolis Garcia. He got the MRI, and thankfully it is not as bad as we initially feared. It is less severe than Wyatt Langford's, which was a low grade 1 oblique injury, a oblique strain. It's not quite as bad as that. Wyatt Langford will make his Cactus League debut on Friday, weather permitting. Same with Jacob deGrom. If it starts to rain, if it is rainy, then those two will be pitching on Saturday. Or I guess Wyatt Langford will probably not be pitching on Saturday. He will be playing, hopefully the field. Probably just DHing. We'll see what happens once we get there on Saturday. But that's basically 2 weeks that Wyatt Langford missed. And so Adolis Garcia's injury is not as severe as Wyatt Langford's, which was also not that severe. Now, the typical average return time for a grade 1 oblique strain for a hitter is 27 days. That would have put Adolis Garcia back on March 30th, which would have made him miss opening day, but thankfully it's not going to be that bad. So Adolis Garcia is probably going to miss less than 2 weeks, which is about how much Wyatt Langford missed. So that would put him back, okay, let's say 13 days. That puts him back on March 18th. That's still about a week left of spring training. He was looking fairly good in spring training. His goals this year are pretty lofty, 100 RBIs and 50 home runs. I think if he gets 50 home runs, I think he'll get more than 100 RBIs this season. But Adolis is feeling good about himself. He's feeling good about his knees, which had not been feeling good the last couple of years. Could be part of why he had lost so much speed, part of why he was so susceptible to chasing even more outside the zone, being a little bit, more. He had to make those swing decisions a little bit faster, and his bat speed was also down. He trained to get that bat speed up, and if his knees are feeling better, if all of him is feeling a little bit better, if the oblique heals up nicely like we hope it does, then hopefully we'll see the best version of Adolis Garcia, or close to it. I don't know what we're going to see the best version, because the best version was what he did in the ALCS in 2023, and doing that for a full season, that would be Barry Bondsian, basically, except Bonds had a little bit higher of a walk rate than Adolis Garcia, and not as much meaning to me personally. But it's good to hear this about Adolis Garcia, because there were some concerns, and it seemed like with that, before this update about Wyatt Langford, I was starting to think, okay, maybe there is a little bit more of a setback, because initially the hope was that Wyatt Langford would miss about a week, and early on this week, on Sunday actually, Bruce Bochy said that Wyatt Langford would be returning to game action early on in the week, and Monday came, no Wyatt Langford in the lineup. Tuesday came, no Wyatt Langford in the lineup. Wednesday came, still no Wyatt Langford in the lineup, and I thought, okay, has he had some kind of setback? What's the deal? Is it not as mild as we had hoped? He was already swinging the bat and running the bases and doing all kinds of baseball stuff as recently as, I believe, Friday was when he started doing all of that. He was doing that over the weekend and feeling good and hoping to get back into game action, pretty quickly, but that wasn't the case, and I think that's a lot of why the Rangers have played so much of these guys in the outfield that I wasn't sure were going to make the opening day roster, and those two injuries I thought cracked the door just a little bit open, especially with Alejandro Ozuna. He was having a fantastic spring training. So far he is really, really turning heads, and I think that he might have jumped Dustin Harris in terms of that order of guys who probably won't make the opening day roster, but will be, right there to get a crack at it if there is some kind of an injury or some kind of a setback or a trade or whatever ends up happening that we didn't expect. I think that Ozuna, he's very much impressed Bruce Bochy. He cannot stop raving about him. And Kevin Pillar was definitely some injury, more than injury insurance. It's just a guy who can play the outfield, all three spots, play it well, and crush left-handed pitching. The Rangers don't have a whole lot of those guys that are crushing left-handed pitching. They have Wyatt Langford, they have Josh Young, and really outside of that, Higashioka's pretty good against lefties. In the past, Jonah Heim has been pretty good against lefties, but they've got a couple of guys who cannot really hit lefties all that well or might not get that much of an opportunity. Jock Peterson, probably not going to get a whole lot of opportunities against left-handed pitching. Evan Carter, I think he will get some, but he has not excelled. He needs those reps at the big league level to get better and then eventually become at least passable against left-handed pitching. But if you're trying to win baseball games, you're not really trying to develop players at the big league level, which is why it'll be hard for Evan to get those reps against lefties. I think eventually he will get them. I think eventually he will figure it out. He is a very talented, very young player who has played not all that much professional baseball, especially with those back injuries taking, the better part of 2 seasons from him. And he's only had, 4 professional seasons in general? I mean, this is a talented kid that I think will figure it out. But Kevin Pillar signing here was not just, let's take a flyer on this guy. That was a guy who's is competing for a roster spot. He is getting a lot of run, and same with Alejandro Ozuna. He is getting a lot of playing time, and he is making the most of it. He is turning heads. He is changing even my perspective on him. I mean, I saw him a little bit in Frisco last year, and he looked really good. He didn't look like a guy who was, a top 100 prospect. He didn't even look like a guy who would be in the Rangers' top 5. I believe the highest that anybody has him is MLB Pipeline. They have him at number 8 in their Rangers' top 30 prospects. As of at least the last time that I checked. I think I had him at 13. Maybe I had him at 12, but I didn't get him particularly close to the top 10, and maybe that was a disservice to him. Maybe I should have had him a little bit higher. But thankfully, this Adolis Garcia injury doesn't seem to be too severe, but I still think that, those guys, with how poorly Leote has done this spring, I mean, he's got a couple of home runs and a couple of really, really hard hit balls that turned into outs, but he's got a lot of swing and miss. He's had a lot of strikeouts. He just hasn't done a whole lot there. He is getting some run out there in the corner outfield spots, which he hasn't before. I don't really particularly know why he is getting that run. I know that the Rangers want to make him more versatile and things like that, but he's their best defensive option in center field. If he is going to be playing, it is because of his glove. It is because his glove is best in center field. I don't really know exactly why they're getting him a whole bunch of run in left and right field, just getting him some different looks. Maybe that'll help make him a better defender in center field, but I don't particularly see the need for that. If Leote is playing, which it's become an if, unfortunately. I mean, he had a really good 2023 season and a pretty terrible 2024 season. He's a streaky player. He's a guy who is carried by his glove, and if he's not making some of those routine plays and not making as many of the spectacular plays, then the offense, which is below average, if it's not even to average, then he's not going to be an everyday player. If the offense and the glove are not up to those same standards, if the glove is anything less than elite, then, and the bat is below average, then you go from not even an everyday player to maybe not even on the roster. Maybe he gets optioned a little bit this year. Maybe the Rangers do play some Kevin Pillar. Now, his defense is nowhere near Leote Taveras', but he's got a skill set, a very specific skill set the Rangers need. He can crush left-handed pitching, and he can play at least passable to sometimes above average defense at all 3 outfield spots. Now, I think when the Rangers end up facing a left-handed starter, especially a really good one, the Rangers should put Wyatt Langford out there in center field. I think they should do that, honestly, for the most part. I talked about it on, I believe it was Friday's show, why Evan Carter, even though he's one of the best options to start every day in center field, I think playing him more in left, especially this year, when they're trying to take it easy on him to make that chronic back condition go into remission, to just put less wear and tear on his body. Playing him in a corner outfield spot where he's not running around is not as much, not making as many leaping grabs and things like that, and diving for balls if he's in a corner. Just mathematically, fewer balls are hit to him, and he doesn't have to back up every single ball hit to the outfield if you're playing a corner versus when you're playing in center field. But it's good to know that Adolis Garcia will probably be ready for opening day. It will make it much more possible that he hits those lofty goals of 50 home runs and 100 runs batted in. But still keep an eye on Kevin Pillar. Keep an eye on Alejandro Ozuna. I don't think there are very many logical, plausible scenarios where Alejandro Ozuna cracks the opening day roster. But with what he's done this year, or this spring, and what he did last year as well, my thoughts on him cracking the big leagues at some point this year have changed this spring. I thought, probably not happening until maybe September. But with what he's done so far, I'm thinking, who knows? Maybe at the All-Star break, this guy is cracking into the Rangers' big league roster. Coming up, we're talking about Emiliano Teodo, him starting versus him relieving. Why I've seen him so many times and I still don't really have a definitive answer, and why that is. All that and more right after this. This show is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios are one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better-for-you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller for longer. Personally, I love the no-shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk, on a road trip, or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. And if you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Whether you're running between meetings, dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. So get snackin' and get crackin' with a snack pack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Shout out to the Everydayers making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I'll be talking about the mystery of Mahle, why Tyler Mahle's season is filled with so many different outcomes that it could possibly go, and why he might be the person who determines so much about what the Rangers do in 2025, whether they succeed, whether they fail. All right, let's talk about somebody who is also a mystery, in that I don't know if he's going to start or if he's going to relieve. I don't know if, and I don't know whether he should start or relieve. I've seen 3 different Emiliano Teodo starts. This is one of the guys who I've seen the most as a prospect in Frisco, and at least on the pitcher side. And last year I saw a couple of his best starts. I saw the start against the Emerald Assad Poodles back on June 16th. He went 5 innings, allowed just 2 hits, only 1 walk, and struck out 11, a season high, and a season high in strikeouts and a season low in both hits. Actually, no, not in hits, but in walks. He also had 4 hitless innings 4 no-hit innings in April 13th. Actually, I might have seen him 4 times last year. I saw him at least 3, because I'm pretty sure I was at that April 13th game where he went 4 innings of no-hit baseball, but did allow a run, allowed 4 walks, and struck out 5. This is a guy who has got just the nastiest stuff. If you want just pure velocity, this is the hardest thrower in the Rangers system, and it's not particularly close. When this guy is touching 100, I don't really blink or sniff first, go, whoa, oh my gosh, Emiliano Teodo touched 100? Because, yeah, he does that. He sits in the upper 90s as a starter, 5 innings long, 6 innings long. He is still out there touching 98, 99. I mean, I don't think I've seen Kumar Rocker hit 100, but he also sits there in the upper 90s. But Teodo's stuff is just freaking nasty. The biggest change for him that I think really unlocked his potential, made me think, because when a guy throws 100 miles an hour, the immediate thought is, oh, shove this guy in the pen right now, just gas him up to the big leagues, because, there's not a whole lot of starters who can maintain that velocity and stay healthy for 5 innings or so. It's just not a thing that happens all that often, especially when you get to the point where, with Teodo, where he's kind of basically a two-pitch pitcher. Not quite. The changeup has really made some strides forward, and that's going to determine a lot. But he is a sinker. He is a slurve. It is listed as a slider. I don't think that StatCast could possibly call a pitch a slurve. I haven't seen it do that just yet. But it's a funky pitch. It's a breaking pitch. And honestly, it's a better pitch than his fastball, which the thing that unlocked the fastball that made it that much better, it used to be one of those dead zone fastballs where he had a lot of velocity, but it was just straight as an arrow. And it doesn't matter how hard you're throwing. If it does not move, if it's not deceptive, big league hitters can time it up, even if you're throwing 115 miles an hour, which, by the way, is not physically possible. Even if you were, though, if it moves straight as an arrow, big league hitters could time it up and crush it. They just could. It's harder, but they still can. But when he switched from a four-seam fastball to a two-seam fastball, or a sinker, it's the same thing. A two-seamer is a sinker. They're the same thing. But the velocity did not dip off at all. It was still sitting 98, 99, 100, 102. The highest he's touched is 104. That was with the four-seamer. The high end of throwing 103, 104, he hasn't really done that with a two-seamer, but it still regularly sits 99 with some pretty decent movement. And the slurve, which can be more slider, it can be more curvy. He's got a good feel for manipulating that pitch, making the velocity bend. I've seen it as high as, I think, 92 is the hardest that he's thrown it. And I've seen it also in the low 80s with a lot more break, a lot more loopiness on it. He's got a really good feel for that pitch, and it's honestly a better pitch than the fastball. But the changeup has really made some progress as that kind of third pitch. If you want to count the slurve as two different pitches, you can. I think he does, because he calls it a slurve. I asked him about it at Frisco Rough Riders Media Day last year. I'm like, okay, is that pitch a slider? Is it a curveball? Because I was initially seeing it called a curveball that was in the 90-mile-an-hour range, and I'm like, that's crazy. That's not something that happens a whole lot. And slurves usually don't go that hard. Usually it's just sliders that can go into the 90-mile-an-hour range. And it's got some good bend on it. He's got, honestly, more of a feel for throwing it for strikes than he has his fastball. Because the fastball, it goes hard, but a lot of times it felt like, he admitted as much this spring, that he was just trying to gas it by guys, not as much, not even having control nor command. So control is just throwing strikes. Command is throwing quality strikes. I'm not sure how much command Emiliano Teodo has in him, but I think he can get to the point where he has control of just throwing pitches in the strike zone. And when your stuff's that nasty, if it's just in the strike zone, then it's going to be incredibly hard to hit. And hitters can't just, watch 102 miles an hour go by them for ball four. They got to actually try and swing at it and try and make some kind of contact. And for the most part last year, hitters could not make contact. I mean, he had a couple of bunts that a couple of starts where he blew up just a little bit. He walked a batter in every single outing he had last year, but there was basically a 3-month stretch where he was just downright unhittable. He had a 3.78 ERA in the month of April. He had an ERA north of 3 in August, 3.21. Neither of those bad months. But from May to July, 11 starts in that span. In May, he had 4 starts, a sub-1 ERA, a .82 ERA. In 5 starts in June, he had a 1.5 ERA. And in 2 starts in July, 8 2/3 innings, he had a 1.04 ERA. Now, I think June was probably his best month. He had 24 innings, and he struck out 40. He was just unhittable. But just because they couldn't hit him doesn't mean they couldn't get on base. The command, the control, that is the problem for Teodo. Because even if you're a really, really nasty reliever, you can get away with being a little bit more walk prone, but you've got to be in the strike zone at least enough to keep hitters honest. And for the most part in his career, he's had some troubles with that. I mean, the hits per 9 for him have always been low. I mean, last year is at 5.5 hits per 9. And surprise, as a reliever in the Arizona Fall League in 2023, he was unhittable. 8 outings there, 11 innings, 5 saves. He was the reliever of the year in the Arizona Fall League back in 2023, despite, for the vast majority of his minor league career, being a starting pitcher. But in those 11 innings, he only allowed 3 hits. He didn't allow a single run. He only walked 3, and he had 19 strikeouts. That's 15.5 Ks per nine. That is a ludicrous rate. And 2.5 walks per nine as reliever in surprise. In Frisco last year, over 5 walks per nine, over 11.5 strikeouts per nine, under 6 hits per nine. I mean, he was unhittable. A 1.98 ERA for a full season, 86 and a third innings, 110 strikeouts, 50 walks. That was a very, very good year for Teodo. But you have more value as a starter. Coming up, we're going to talk about why I'm still on the fence, but Emiliano Teodo is not on the fence about what he wants to do, whether he wants to start, whether he wants to leave. He has got a clear option for what he wants in his head. We'll talk about what that is and why I'm still on the fence right after this. Now we're talking about starting pitchers versus relief pitchers. Before we get back to Teodo, I want to bring up a particular starting pitcher. It seems like Bruce Bochy has all but declared Nathan Eovaldi as the opening day starter. He didn't officially come out and say it, but Eovaldi is going to be the first repeat opening day starting pitcher that the Rangers have had in, gosh, I think it's been since Yu Darvish had consecutive opening day starts. I think that was 2013 and 2014. That happened. It's been a long time since the Rangers have had a guy start back-to-back opening days. So good for Nathan Eovaldi. He hasn't officially said it, but he has all but officially said it. Now, back to the guy who is a starter, unless he's not a starter, or should he be? I don't know with Teodo, because with pitching prospects in general, every single pitching prospect there is in the back of their mind, well, every single starting pitching prospect in the back of their mind, in the back of the organization's mind, thought is, okay, if this guy can't stick as a starter, maybe he can be a really sick, nasty reliever and just absolutely carve guys up for an inning at a time. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles. It's always a thought. But usually once guys go reliever, they don't come back to being a starter. It's a hard transition to make backwards. You know, it's happened successfully a few times. I mean, Adam Wainwright did it very, very successfully. He was a closer early on with the Cardinals, then transitioned to a starting pitcher and was very, very good for a long time. There are also examples of it working for the Rangers and C.J. Wilson. He was a reliever when he came up with the Rangers, when he broke camp. He was a very, very good reliever. He transitioned to a starter, and he was one of the best homegrown starting pitchers the Rangers have had the last 20 years, and it's honestly not particularly close. But there's also a lot of examples of it not working, of guys like Neftali Feliz, where he was a starter all the way up until he made his big league debut. I mean, he was a guy who was, sitting in that upper 90s, kind of similar to Teodo, except he had a little bit more command of the strike zone than Teodo had. But Neftali Feliz was sitting up in the upper 90s, running up to 100 regularly as a starting pitcher for 5 innings out there in Frisco. I mean, talk to some of the guys who have been around for a while, like tepid participation. He'll tell you that he watched Neftali Feliz run it up there as one of the better Rangers pitching prospects that he's seen in quite some time. And then when the Rangers tried to transition him back, he had Tommy John surgery, and then it just kind of spiraled from there. He never really recovered. He looked really good in those couple of starts that he had, but once he had that elbow reconstruction surgery, and Neftali Feliz, I believe he's in camp with the Mariners now trying to make a comeback. He hasn't been in the big league since, I believe, 2021. It's been a long time, and even then he didn't pitch all that much with the Dodgers in that 2021 season. It's hard to come back from that. You look at kind of the long-term prognostication of the Rangers' rotation. I mean, in 2026, so say Teodo comes up right now and he gives this bullpen, that nasty, bad A guy in the back of the pen, out there chucking 100. He's got that mentality to be a closer, and he has said, I don't care about being a starter versus a closer. I want to make the team now. Love that mentality for him. That is his mentality of a guy who is ready to make his big league debut now, even though he hasn't pitched above AA. He hasn't pitched at all in AAA. But if he's a reliever, usually that's a little bit less of a concern than if you're a starting pitcher. If you're a starter, you'd rather have a couple outings out there in AAA before you say, okay, all right, I'm ready to go through a big league lineup, 2-3 times maybe. If you're a reliever, you're going through 3, 4, maybe 5 hitters a night. You don't have to prepare as much. You don't have to have as wide an arsenal. But with Teodo and just the rotation in general, starters are much harder to get, especially homegrown ones. You can pick random bullpen guys out there off the free agent wire, and they're not going to cost you. There's basically not a single reliever alive that will make, $150 million contract versus, top end starters or even like middle of the road starters. They're making, 10, 15, $20 million a pop. Even middle of the rotation guys are getting that. I mean, Eovaldi might end up by the end of this contract being a number 3 starter, and he's making $25 million a year. You can only afford to have so many free agent starting pitchers. That's why it was such a marvel that the Rangers were able to buy so much of a rotation in 2023. It was basically no homegrown starters. It's just all guys that are free agent expensive arms. Starting pitching is the most expensive thing on the market. It just is. So you look in 2026, the Rangers will have DeGrom and Eovaldi. They lose Malley, they lose John Gray to free agency. Maybe they'll bring them back. But the guys who are going to be in the rotation, if nobody is signed, which, again, I don't think is going to happen, but maybe it is, you got Rocker and Bradford, and then your 5 spot in that rotation, assuming all of those guys are healthy and everything's all good to go with them, you got a competition between Jack Leiter, Emiliano Teodo, Winston Santos, maybe Mitch Bratt's ready at that point, maybe Cole Drake's ready at that point. Maybe Jose Corniel is knocking on the door there. And then you look in 2027, you'll have an even older Jacob deGrom and even older Nathan Eovaldi. You'll probably have Rocker, close to at least capable number 2, maybe number 3 starting pitcher. Same with Bradford. I think Leiter will be more of a staple of the rotation at that point. And then maybe you get Alejandro Rosario back. You thought maybe at some point this year Rosario would be knocking on the door of that rotation, but you just look at the options and down the line, maybe Jose Corniel is there at that point. I'm not entirely sure. I can't completely predict the future. I actually can't even predict it really at all, except when I picked the Rangers to win the World Series out of pure delusion at the start of the playoffs in 2023. But you also have to go back to how valuable having a homegrown elite closer, which Teodo could be. He could be that, honestly, right now. And there's also the other option. With the starting pitcher, you want to keep them as a starter as long as possible. You want to give them every option, every chance to stick as a starter because homegrown starting pitching is the most valuable thing that you can get because it keeps you from having to pay $30, $35, $25 million for a bunch of different starters. It just is so valuable financially so that you could spend money elsewhere and build your team in a well-rounded way. But there's also the chance, because Teodo did struggle with those walks in AA, and there is a possibility that he goes to AAA. It's not out of the realm of possibilities that he goes to AAA, and he struggles even more with walks, and then eventually ends up at the pen anyway, and then you've spent a couple of months just trying to stick him as a starter, and he didn't stick, and those are months that you could have had him in your big league bullpen, helping out what is probably going to be, I think, at least at this point, as constructed, a fine bullpen. Maybe not an elite one. You definitely don't have a Kirby Yates back there. You definitely don't have a David Robertson back there, even though he's on the market, and I would have loved for the Rangers to just bring him back and say, to heck with the luxury tax. We're trying to win a freaking World Series. Alas, that's not the owner that the Rangers have. But there is that chance that you say, okay, well, we wasted these 2 months, but I still don't think it would be a waste. I think that you got to keep him, giving him every chance to stick as a starter, unless you don't. I don't know. I am no closer to a decision at the start of this podcast when I started yapping about Emiliano Teodo sticking as a starter versus not, as I was at the end of last year. I mean, he is just right there on the margin. He is so close there. If I saw a meaningful improvement in that changeup, because right now in my mind, I've seen quite a bit of Teodo. I think that the worst case scenario for Teodo is he's a bit of a wild reliever to the point where you can't really trust him in the 9th inning, but still a valuable 7th or 8th inning high leverage guy. I think that's the absolute worst case scenario for him. I don't see a scenario where he doesn't make the big leagues at all, unless he just stops liking baseball and quits, or some kind of really bad injury befalls him. Knock on wood, not hoping for that for anybody. But the best case scenario for me for Teodo, I think, is maybe a number 3 starter. Again, it kind of depends on if he can hone in that control. If he can get any kind of command, then who knows what the ceiling is, because the raw stuff is absolutely disgusting. If the changeup can make a little bit more progress to being at least a big league average pitch, right now I think it's fringe average at best, and I think that's definitely okay for a reliever if you're basically just a two-pitch guy, which, again, you could even count those two different kinds of breaking balls as two different pitches, so 4 pitches, which for me, if you're a starter, I'd really prefer 4 pitches, unless those 3 pitches are all really, really good. But again, I'm not entirely sure. I think eventually the most likely scenario for Teodo is that he does end up as a back-end reliever, and it does feel like lazy thinking of saying, oh, guy throws hard, put him in bullpen. That's what you do with hard-throwing guys. It feels a little lazy, and when he does have this much potential to be at least a mid-rotation to back-end starter. If it's a mid-rotation starter, then I would very much, as long as that's an option, and that's a possibility in the Rangers evaluation minds that he could stick as a mid-rotation starter, then you got to give him the chance. If, in their minds, he's at best a number 4 or number 5 starter, I think it's more valuable to just put him in the pen right now. So I guess that's kind of where I land. It depends on the Rangers' own internal evaluations. If you see him in the bullpen this year, I think he could be really, really good. And I think it means the Rangers think that changeup is not that great, that he is going to stay a little erratic, and maybe eventually he does transition out of the bullpen and back into a starting role. And maybe some of those other guys that I mentioned, like, Leiter or Santos or Bratt or Drake or Corniel, maybe they end up as those nasty, sick relievers in the bullpen. Not entirely sure, but what I am sure of is this guy throws hard. This guy is bringing it this spring. And no matter where he ends up in the Rangers system, whether he's a starter, whether he's a reliever, I think he's going to impact this team in a big, big way for not just this year, but hopefully for years to come. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.